Okay, we'll get started here today. As in the days of. Sorry, I can't see you today because of it's a dark day here and I can't see because of the lights, so I assume there's somebody out there. I'll just pretend like I can see the people that I can talk to. So today, for a prophecy update, we're just going to look at things. It actually was, in terms of things going on, it was a fairly light week. It was like everybody took a vacation. I'll tell you what I'm not going to talk about when I don't talk about it in a few minutes. But we talk each week about the convergence of events that seem to indicate that the return of the Lord is very close. I think the appropriate verses to focus on this week are the verses that we often refer to a lot in Luke chapter 17, starting at verse 26, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the Son of Man. They did eat, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise, also, as it was in the days of Lot, they did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. But the same day that Lot went out from Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Even thus shall it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. So we know that as we get closer to the time of the return of the Lord, there will be this time where it will be like it was in the days of Noah and like it was in the days of Lot. And we know that from reading Scripture, for example, in 2 Peter chapter 2, he talks about how Lot felt. He says that man, that poor man, that his righteous soul was vexed or perplexed, troubled by the things that he saw going on around him. And so, as I often say, if you're bothered by the things that are going on in the world today, then you are in the right spot. It's a good indication that you're in your right spot with the Lord, because it should bother you. Because a lot of this completely undermines everything that the Word of God stands for. And I often wonder how much worse could it have been, or could it have been worse in the days of Lot compared to what it is like today? There's a lot of things. And there's a lot of things going on that are things that just have not really happened in our lifetime. And they're raising a lot of issues, and they're very much like it was at the time of the Tower of Babel. These are men that are trying to become God. Here's a report from the Telegraph just yesterday. British scientists can genetically modify human embryos, ethics committee says. So what this scientist wanted to do was he wanted to genetically modify surplus human embryos that people had donated. You know, they had created an embryo, it's been in the freezer for a while, and they don't need it anymore. They've had their children, or they decided not to have children. They don't want to do it in vitro, so they're donating the embryos to this scientist, and he wants to genetically modify them. And the ethics committee in Britain says, yeah, that's fine. Now, this is deeply troubling, because what are they trying to do? Now, like they say, well, we're not really trying to do that much. But look, we just shared with you a report last week from the New York Times about a meeting that took place at Harvard where they were talking about altering DNA. And so these people think that they're going to turn humans into this perfect thing. And I cannot think of an example in history where those attempts did not end badly. And so it is, I believe, as in the days of Noah, as in the days of Lot. Another thing that's happening now, there was a report this week, this is from The Economist a week ago, when the drugs don't work, the rise of antibiotic resistance. And this is something that's been going on for a long time. I remember my mother telling me that how wonderful it was when the antibiotics first came out. I think it was in the late 30s or 40s. That it was wonderful because these infections that people used to die from now could be treated. The problem is now that bacteria have grown resistant to a lot of the antibiotics. There's a list right there on the left-hand side of the ones that have kind of reached the critical stage. There was a report of a lady in Pennsylvania this week who had a drug-resistant bacteria that was not resistant to any of the known, even the strongest or the antibiotic of last resort, they call it. Now, whether that is an indication, that particular lady, that we have a huge problem in this. This is a huge problem worldwide because of the use of over antibiotics. So what turned out to be, or what looked like it was going to be a great thing initially, is now turning out bad. And look, I think this plays into the pestilence that we see coming in the book of Revelation, that there will be these things that just won't be able to be fought medically. We see all sorts of things. For example, here's an article from the Los Angeles Times the other day. Rob Bell, who's now doing a podcast. I hear it's one of the most popular podcasts out there. He's still a best-selling author. He has a new book out there, and it's not that my slide or my picture is out of focus. That's exactly what the book cover looks like. How to Be Here by Rob Bell. That's his new book, just came out a little while ago. This article quotes, and I think the thing that I would take away from these things that I share with you about Rob Bell is, as I observed and listened to sermons that he did at Mars Hill, it was apparent a long, long time ago that this is where this man was. He was off into some religion of his own making. He was not teaching true Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, and it bothered me that a lot of people were out there promoting Rob Bell. Oh, Rob Bell's great, isn't he great? He's such a good example. But the truth of the matter was, Rob Bell was way off base. And the article in the LA Times this week ends with this quote from Rob Bell. I think there's something more going on here, he says, of our lives on earth, and of a sense that if we're able to truly be present for them, there is much to marvel at. And he says, and I think for many people, spirituality, religion, God, Jesus, whatever, has been trivialized. I think we're way beyond one particular religion. We're about what does it mean to be human. But listen, folks, this is what this guy taught from the pulpit at Mars Hill Church for a long time. This is consistent with what he's been saying. And I don't know why people held him up on this pedestal. He was, when the Time magazine came out with their 50 most influential evangelical leaders, he was in the top 5, I believe. He was an evangelical rock star. That's how they used to refer to him. And people used to flock to him. But this is an indication of the fact that people in the church have lost their discernment. They cannot look at these things and understand why Rob Bell is off. What's wrong with him? Everybody likes him. Our education system is running amok. This is a couple reports this week. Oberlin students want to abolish midterms and any grades below C. So if you are a parent and you're a little bit well off and you have to pay the full rate at Oberlin for your $51,800 of tuition, room, and board per year, what it costs now, you will have a student who will come home and say, I don't want grades. It's not fair. Listen to this. Students at Oberlin College are asking the school to put academics on the back burner so they can better turn their attention to activism, social justice. More than 1,300 students, I don't know what's the student population there, 2,000 maybe? More than 1,300 students at the Midwestern Liberal Arts College have now signed a petition just up the road asking the college to get rid of any grade below a C for the semester, and some students are requesting alternatives to the standard written midterm examination, such as a conversation with a professor in lieu of an essay. In fact, the New Yorker has a very long article, and I won't go into details about what it says. The Big Uneasy. What's what's railing the liberal arts campus, and it uses Oberlin as this example of something that's really, it's really off. They don't, I think I shared with you last year some of the things that the Oberlin students were sharing, that because of the Chinese dishes weren't authentically Chinese, so therefore it was an anti-Chinese thing, or the soul food wasn't prepared with the right recipes, therefore it was a slam against black culture or something. They had a whole list of demands. Fortunately, the administration did stand up to it a little bit, so now they've come back with this petition. We're too busy protesting things and engage in social justice, so we need to get rid of the grades below a C. Because and one person said, I just don't have time, I'm stressed out. Because, I'm out protesting and I just don't have time for these demands of academic demands. And so what I should have put up here was I should have called this the snowflake, the fragile snowflake part of our update today. So I know if you ever drive by Oberlin, don't make eye contact with the students there, because you'll stress them out, and they may cry and those little snowflakes may melt. So, one of the characteristics of the days of Noah was the earth was filled with violence. And this from Breitbart the other day, Tom Cotton, senator, said that the Obama administration is set to release 70,000 felons from federal prison without any sentencing reform legislation. So Congress hasn't enacted anything to change things, but what is Obama? He's making up his own laws. It's what Loretta Lynch, she's the chief law enforcement officer. Law enforcement officer is the operative term of her job description. She's not the law writing officer, but she's pushing this transgender thing because she wants the law to be different. Okay, go run for office and get elected and enact the legislation. But I'm telling you, the Constitution has been completely ripped up. And it's been ripped up by both sides. So more by one side than the other, I think, but neither side is really following that document anymore. And here's what Tom Cotton had to say. Unfortunately, we may now be living through the early stages of a new crime wave. Murders and rapes and other violent crimes are up all across America. The American people say they're more concerned about crime than they have been at any time in the last 15 years. This is not the time to start releasing violent felons from prison. And, by the way, the goal is to release 70,000. About 30,000 of them have been released already. And we've seen an example here in Columbus. There was 2 or 3 people were murdered on the east side by someone who had been released from prison because he was a nonviolent drug offender. And they were going to test, I think the people he thought were going to testify against him or had witnessed something that he had done on another crime, and so he went and killed them. So it happens. By the way, this is just a follow-up on something I talked about previously. We talked about the fact that 16 states, the attorney generals of 16 states are pursuing people. They're sending subpoenas out to academic institutions, think tanks, professors, other people, because they're climate change skeptics. And I saw an interesting exchange with a senator from the Northeast. I think it was Senator Ed Markey from Massachusetts. It was like, hey, it's 97%. And the people on the panel, it was Mark Stein. By the way, it's a great clip. You ought to look it up. It was Mark Stein and a female scientist who were saying, no, not everybody agrees. And this guy was saying, well, yes, they do. Yes, they do. And he's not a scientist. And people at Mark Stein's involved in some litigation up in Canada right now because he criticized the guy who made up the hockey stick graph, Michael Mann, and Michael Mann sued him and said, because I'm not sure exactly why. I guess it's slander that you would challenge my scientific findings or conclusions. But this is the world that we live in. So this is a letter from Ted Cruz and some other senators to Loretta Lynch saying, you need to back off on this. You need to stop this. Because Loretta Lynch herself said that she was going to be pursuing fraud claims against different companies because they didn't go along with what the president's view was on climate change. And therefore, they must be committing fraud and lying. I'm actually not going to play the unblinking eye of history. I'm not going to play any of that ridiculous thing that passed for a speech in Hiroshima, Japan the other day by the president. If you are so inclined to beat yourself over the head with it, go watch it yourself. But here's my takeaway from all of that. If we live at the time that I think we live at, you should see patterns start to develop. Now, Jesus said in Luke chapter 17, there was patterns that you should look at that would be indicative that you were living in that time. It was as it was in the days of Noah, as it was in the days of Lot. We also know that there are a description of a world leader that's coming that will try to change times and seasons. That's the Antichrist. And again, I'm not making any assertion as to who is or who is not the Antichrist. Let me be clear about that. But what I'm saying is that you are seeing among world leaders a pattern of people demonstrated by our president who are changing times. They are changing history. And what that speech in Hiroshima did was a complete rewrite of history from somebody steeped in leftism point of view. There's just no doubt about it. It's changing history. And that's what they want to do. Hillary Clinton, remember the clip we play a lot? Long-held religious views and other beliefs have to be changed. This is what the push is. And this is part of that whole beast system that's going to come about in the end times, that they're going to try to get people to go along with this. And look, to the faithful remnant, it will seem insane and without reason. And that's what when I heard what the president said, that's what I thought. It doesn't make any sense. It's a complete rewrite of history. But the media is like this. Here's a little clip from MSNBC with Brian Williams, I guess, who's going through rehab to get over his propensity for making up stories. But listen to what he said in this little clip.
And Brian, just a word, two men you know very well, Dick Lugar and Sam Nunn. The fact that they had this nuclear threat initiative and that they controlled, through a bipartisan act of Congress, controlled the spread of nuclear materials, non-state actors, materials, even in this age of terror, all these decades after the end of the Cold War, is just remarkable, and I don't think they get enough credit for it.
It is, and that is still the threat that people worry about, that this material will fall into the wrong hands. If people have found the U.S. to be preachy in the years since Hiroshima and Nagasaki about the use of nuclear weapons, it's because we're the only nation to have used them in anger. Sometimes I am amazed that the world has been without these weapons all the years since, but it is a point of great pride by the people who've seen to it.
So we used them in anger. Okay, why were we angry? What was totally missing from that guy's speech in Hiroshima were the facts of the evil, wretched nature of the Imperial Japanese army and government. They needed to be eradicated from the planet. Tens of millions, not tens of thousands, tens of millions of people died at the hands of that evil regime. Pearl Harbor, you think the president's going to stop in his home state and maybe go to the Pearl Harbor Memorial for Memorial Day on the way back? What do you think the odds of that are? 0. I hope I'm surprised. The Bataan Death March. Go read about that. The atrocities and cruelty engaged in by Imperial Japan were unbelievable. The rape of Nanking, bodies stacked like cordwood, people put in pits and burned alive by Imperial Japanese army. Yeah, we were angry. You know what? We would have been even more upset if we'd had to invade the highly populated island of Japan, their main islands, and anywhere from 600,000 to 2 million people would have died. This article at Breitbart says it is very easy for callow politicians, and boy is that an understatement, in 2016 to say that more Americans and more Japanese should have died in battle during a conventional invasion of Japan to spare it the fury of the atomic bomb. Not many people felt that way at the time, especially if they were aware of the atrocities chronicled here. Barack Obama treats the bombing of Hiroshima as a unique evil. No, sir, it was the end of evil. Memorial Day is about showing our gratitude and respect to the heroes who had no choice but to kill them, including the crew of the Enola Gay. They saved a hell of a lot of lives and souls on that terrible day. And here's a letter written in 1963 by Harry Truman, who made the decision to go ahead and say that it was okay to do the bomb. And then he says this in the middle paragraph: you must always remember that people forget, as you said in your column. He's writing to a Chicago Sun-Times columnist, Irv Kupcinet. You must always remember that people forget, as you said in your column, that the bombing of Pearl Harbor was done while we were at peace with Japan and trying our best to negotiate a treaty with them. All you have to do is to go out and stand on the keel of the battleship in Pearl Harbor with 3,000 youngsters underneath it who had no choice whatsoever of saving their lives. That is true of 2 or 3 other battleships that were sunk in Pearl Harbor. Altogether, there were between 3,000 and 6,000 youngsters killed at that time without any declaration of war. It was plain murder. I knew what I was doing when I stopped the war that would have killed 500,000 youngsters on both sides if those bombs had not been dropped. I have no regrets, and under the same circumstances, I would do it again. And this letter is not confidential. That was a courageous president. Not like the display that we saw this week. But the takeaway point is, people will try to rewrite history. And that's exactly what that was done this week. And everybody said, oh, well, he didn't apologize. Oh, yeah, okay. He didn't say, I'm sorry. He said everything but those words. This was an article from a while ago, The Perils of Writing a Provocative Email at Yale. Remember, I mentioned this last fall. Husband and wife, they were dorm parents, and there was a scene. I played the video of the one student screaming, "You're supposed to protect us. You're like our parents." We're little snowflakes, and so they've essentially resigned and been pushed out of their positions. And I think the student is probably running for student body president. I don't know. But that's in the Atlantic. You might want to look up that article and read that. This was a report that came out from Barna this week, The End of Absolutes, America's New Moral Code. Look at some of these findings. Under morality and truth, the percentage of U.S. adults by generation and face segment, whatever is right, do you agree with this statement? Somewhat to agree strongly. So these are the people who agree somewhat to strongly with these statements among different categories. Whatever is right for your life or works best for you is the only truth you can know. Among elders, 39% total agree with that, somewhat to strongly. Boomers, 47%. Gen Xers, 59%. Millennials, 74%. Practicing Christians were 41%. No faith, 67%. Other faith, 56%. To this question, every culture must determine what is acceptable morally for its people. Elders, 60%. all the way down to millennials at 70%. And the point of this is we really have a problem. It is as in the days of Noah and Lot, and everyone is doing what is right in their own eyes. And here's a survey that supports it. The Bible provides us with moral truths which are the same for all people in all situations without acceptance. Now, if you look at the line for practicing Christians there, the orange one, 27 plus 56, that would be 83% of practicing Christians agree with that. And my question is, why is it only 83%? It should be 100%. If you're claiming the name of Christ, other faiths are 53%, elders 59%, boomers actually a little bit higher than elders at 72%, and then millennials at 56%. Moral truth, absolute or relative? Absolute is light green, relative is the thing in the middle, and then never thought about it is 28%. But look at the numbers there. 33% of elders think that moral truth is absolute. But 39% thinks it's relative. And then 28%, well, I never thought about it. So you might as well say that it's relative. So if you add up 39 and 28, you get 57%. 67%. 2/3 of elders, and they're the ones who are probably, people would say, are the best. Now, boomers are a little bit better. Gen Xers about the same. Millennials. But practicing Christians, it's only 59% think that moral truth is absolute. So my question again is, why is it only 59%? What kind of church are you going to? Rob Bell's church. I was going to say it. Somebody else got there before me. Whatever is right for your life or works best for you is the only truth you can know. 39% of elders agree with that. Practicing Christians, 41%. Wow. So, we have a problem. That's why I don't think this will ever be a big church. Because we really do think there's moral truth, there's absolutes and that type of thing. And that's not obviously it's not a popular message today. Right out of the box, there's 60% of the people are not going to like what we have to say among almost any demographic category. Even among practicing Christians, it's about 60%. And the last one here from the survey, every culture must determine what is acceptable morality for its people. And look at those numbers. They're all above 60, 70% in every category. And it's almost half of practicing Christians. That is troubling. But when you live in that culture, and I don't know the exact, I don't have the details. You can look up the Barna, you can find it online. We'll try to put a link to it in the YouTube description. You can look, when you look at these results, and you scratch your head, and you're troubled by what's going on, we have a problem. And it is like it was in the days of Noah and Lot. Now, we don't have any Barna surveys from the days of Noah and Lot, but we have good descriptions in Scripture of what it was like in those days, and people were just going about their lives doing what was right in their own eyes. And so in that context where we have a culture that's like that, is this thing that continues to go on and on and on, from time cover, Battle of the Bathroom. Now, what's interesting is that a couple weeks ago, when the Department of Justice and Department of Education came out with their Dear Colleague letter, written to school administrators, saying what the government not really what the law was, but what the federal government was going to push for the law to be. And they were going to file lawsuits against you. They filed a lawsuit against the state of North Carolina because they enacted a law that the president and Loretta Lynch didn't like. So what happens? Your legislators, acting under the authority of the state, they enact this law, and guess what? We sue you. Now, when that letter came out, this is from the New York Times and Los Angeles Times a couple weeks ago, Saturday, the 14th, it talked about a new fight in the battle for civil rights and all. It was front page news, right? It was important. This is unbelievable stuff. We have to put it on the front page. And Beyonce too, you know, she's really important. That she needs to be on the front page as well. But this week, praise the Lord, 11 states, one of which is not Ohio, by the way. I don't know where the governor is. I think he's out counting his fourth place vote, his fourth place finish in the Republican primary in a 3-person race. I'm troubled by that, okay? I am. And where's Mike DeWine? Came out for what? Right. They're not doing anything about it. They're not bothered by it. So, but 11 states have come out and said they haven't done anything about it. 11 states joined in a lawsuit. Could have easily joined in a lawsuit, but Ohio didn't. They sued the federal government over it. Texas said, essentially, we don't want your money. Take it, leave us alone. But this is not just in the United States. This is going on everywhere. Here's some editorials from Canada. There was a bill, I can't remember the number, that was put through Parliament that would essentially make it a crime to oppose transgender rights or to speak out against it. You could go to jail for 2 years. So the little impetulant little snit that is now the Prime Minister of Canada, Trudeau, when he's not elbowing other legislators on the floor of the Parliament, he's pushing through this. Now, by the way, I will give him credit. They voted in favor of Israel and some stuff recently in the UN, and I'm glad for that. But, you know, this is a major issue. What this issue is about is to break down barriers in morality. Whatever is left, they want to destroy. I'm going to play you a clip of the member of Parliament who introduced this, and then they will have an interview, a statement by a 10-year-old boy at the end. I want you to know that it's a boy that's making those comments because you may not be able to tell from the video. But here's a little clip of that.
Say that moments ago, I introduced legislation, Bill C-16, an act to amend the Canadian Human Rights Act and Criminal Code that would ensure that Canadians will be free to identify themselves and to express their gender as they wish, while being protected against discrimination and hate. Because as Canadians, we should feel free and safe to be ourselves.
When we were on the drive today, I was just thinking, oh my gosh, thank goodness this bill is passing, because it will protect us from, as the Minister of Justice said, hateful propaganda, assaults, rape, stuff like that. It could protect us and stop the people who would have just gone off and done it in the past and discriminated or assaulted us, but now it could be stopping them and then basically punishing them if they actually do it. If they still go on. I feel much safer.
You're welcome.
in terms of gender identity and gender expression, clearly articulating this in the Canadian Human Rights Act and in the Criminal Code will enable us to ensure that we are able to collect data, that we are able to collect statistics around violence that is felt and...
She's the Canadian equivalent of Loretta Lynch, okay? She's the Justice Minister. Look, pray for that kid, okay? And pray that the people that are pushing him out there, pushing Charlie out there to make these statements, will be charged with child abuse, because that's exactly what they're doing. They do it under the guise of rights. They're child abusers. My friends, I have very... one criticism of arguments is that the slippery slope argument is not valid. It's not a good way to argue. I submit to you, we are on a very steep and slippery slope with this stuff, because listen, it's not ending. Remember, we are still 4 weeks away from the 1-year anniversary of the Obergefell decision by the United States Supreme Court. 4 weeks. It's been 11 months since that decision came down. And now we have this. What are we going to have in 11 months from now? We are on a very steep slope. It is not going to end with this stuff. And there are people, these different organizations about sex with children and that type of thing, who are starting to stir, and they're becoming very public about what they want. And I'm just saying is, okay, first of all, the statements that this Charlie made are nonsensical. Why? It'll protect us from rape and assault. There are already laws in Canada and every other Western culture in the world that protect people like Charlie from rape and assaults. This law has a whole nother agenda behind it. Those laws are still on the books. I don't know, Charlie has been misled. Charlie is confused on more than one issue. And for these adults to stand there, I'm more troubled by that than anything else. They're using Charlie for their own political agenda. Here's an article. Gresham Barlow School District agrees to pay transgender teacher add gender-neutral bathrooms after complaint. This is in Oregon. People need to leave Oregon, I think, because, I mean, that's where the baker was that got a huge judgment against them. So this guy, I think I'll say it's a guy pretending to be a girl. I think that's how it goes. Looks like a girl in these pictures. Was upset. What was he upset about? Well, he doesn't identify, by the way, as either male or female. He was upset because the teachers in the school where he was would not refer to him as they, because he thought he was kind of part of both, so he should be called they. And I mean, this is an argument. Get your kids out of the public school. Figure it out. There are plenty of groups, there are plenty of things out there, but I'm just telling you is, at some point, you got to pull them out and get them away from this junk. Here's the Dear Colleague letter. Look, I've had a chance to read through this. This is about more than just the bathroom thing in schools, because they're taking Title IX and they're changing it. And so they're giving advice to all these colleges, organizations, educational institutions, tens of thousands of them across the country. Get this. And look at what some of the things are that they say in here. Restrooms and locker rooms. Quote from the letter, a school may provide separate facilities on the basis of sex, but must allow transgender students access to such facilities consistent with their gender identity. A school may not require transgender students to use facilities inconsistent with their gender identity. Translation, if they're a boy, you can't make them use the boys' room or the boys' locker room. That's the flips. That's what that means. That's Orwellian doublespeak. Or to use individual use facilities when other students are not required to do so. A school may, however, make individual user options available to all students who voluntarily seek additional privacy. In other words, if you're a female student and a guy's coming into your locker room, your only remedy is to go and request a single-sex place. But what's going to happen with you when you have that? Well, laws like Canada are adapted. You're going to be charged with bigotry. And if your parents go, they're going to be charged, but you can bet your bottom dollar eventually social services will be involved to get you away from your kids because you're a child abuser. Do you think I'm making this stuff up, by the way? You're free to tell me if I am. Athletics. Listen to this. This is for colleges, okay? Traveling teams and that type of thing in colleges. Let's see, for some reason. It talks about, this is where they have the problem because they hope that the NCAA will come up with some kind of rational implementation of an irrational rule. And so the NCAA is drafting this. I know the Olympics have drafted stuff about certain levels of testosterone, estrogen, all this stuff. But you're not allowed to do doping because you'll be banned. So the whole thing is in a mess. But here's the one I want to do. Housing and overnight accommodations. Title IX allows a student to provide separate housing on the basis of sex. Or school, I'm sorry. Title IX allows a school to provide separate housing on the basis of sex. But a school must allow transgender students to access housing consistent with their gender identity and may not require transgender students to stay in single occupancy accommodations. Translation, they want a room with your daughter, a male transgender, wants a room with your daughter in a hotel room on an athletic trip, that the school has to allow that to happen. Now it says nothing in Title IX prohibits the school from honoring a student's voluntarily request for a single occupancy accommodation if it so chooses. Now listen, you ask for that and you're going to be a bigot. And I mark my words, if you're in a counseling program, you will be excluded from becoming a counselor because you're a bigot. And you could never help these people. So I'll skip over this. This is Heather McDonald. But look, in the context of all of this, going back to what Senator Cotton said earlier, Heather McDonald, she's been writing some great stuff lately. This was in the Wall Street on Tuesday. She made reference to this. FBI Director James Comey has again drawn the wrath of the White House for calling attention to the rising violence in urban areas. Homicides increased 9% in the largest 63 cities in the first quarter of 2016. Non-fatal shootings were up 20% according to Major City Chiefs Association survey. Those increases come on top of last year's 17% rise in homicides in the 56 biggest U.S. cities, with 10 heavily black cities showing murder spikes above 60%. Comey said this, "I was very worried about it last fall," he told a May 11th news conference, "and I am in many ways more worried now," he said, "because the violent crime rate is going up even faster this year." Days of Noah. Very sad article in the Atlantic, The Humbling of Paul Ryan. Now, last week, you remember, I showed you the vote, the video of the vote taking place. It was 212 to 206. And then all of a sudden, the vote, well, it was more than 212, like 219 to 206. And then the votes all changed. And the end vote was 213 to 212. The Republicans defeated the amendment on the defense appropriation bill. Everything's great, right? How long did this last? 4 days? Because they had another amendment to another bill that was the same thing, put out and forth by the same congressman from New York, Mahoney or Maloney, or Baloney. And so what happened this time? How did the Republicans do this time? Well, 43 Republicans voted for it, and it passed by 30 or 40 votes this time. So a great way to hang in there, Republicans, right? Stand up for those conservative values. And so now they're saying, like, here's Paul Ryan, who's conservative by some estimations, and he's troubled by what's going on because people are defecting it, but it's worse. Here's a report from The Hill this week. Bible verse prompts GOP walkout after LGBT vote labeled a sin. Representative Rick Allen, a Georgia freshman, launched, because he's a freshman would do this because he hasn't been indoctrinated enough, okay? He hasn't been through all that brainwashing that they do to you when you go to Washington for a while. A Georgia freshman launched the GOP's regular policy meeting in the Capitol basement by reading a Bible passage condemning homosexuality and suggesting that supporters of the LGBT provision, which passed the House the night before, were defying Christian tenets, attendees said. Several Republicans walked out of the room in disgust. It was blanking ridiculous, said one GOP lawmaker who was in the room and supported the LGBT provision. A GOP leadership aide offered a similar verdict. A lot of members were clearly uncomfortable and upset. Sidebar. Boo-hoo. Sometimes taking the right stand is uncomfortable and upsetting. So, do you see it, the piece that I put together about how this all fits? It's all related. It's all interrelated. Let's look at the geopolitics for a minute, and then we'll leave. This is interesting. Now, we were told, right, by Ben Rhodes, the Ben Rhodes duped the press, and we were told, oh, this thing with Iran, Rouhani's a moderate, you know, he's offsetting the radical Ayatollahs. So guess what? So here's a report in The Economist, of all places, that says, guess what? Who's in charge? The supreme leader is clipping the wings of the reformist president. Oops. Boy, I never saw that one coming. I'm just shocked that happened. How would you ever have thought that the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran might not like somebody who's capitulating to the West even in a little tiny bit? And I don't think he is, but he's certainly getting his wings clipped now. At the same time, we have this problem in North Korea, nuclear. This is the cover of The Economist yesterday. And the Middle East continues to melt down. 165,000 Syrians trapped in between Turkey and ISIS. This was a front cover of the New York Times last Sunday. Now remember, we had all the Kosovo, Bosnia, all those things that happened back during the Clinton administration, and this was going to be wonderful. We were creating a great, safe enclave in Kosovo, and guess what? Per capita, highest percentage of people leaving Kosovo to go fight for the Islamic State of any country on the planet. And this New York Times article, and again, I cite it not because I agree with the New York Times, but sometimes they get it right, details the problem that is occurring there in Kosovo with Saudis coming in and funding radical Islamic mosques, which they've done all over the world. It hasn't changed. And nobody's stopping it. Says this: the latest chapter in this long, sorrowful history involves tiny Kosovo. With a population of only 1.8 million people, Kosovo has sent more of its young people per capita than any other country to fight and die in Iraq and Syria. Since 2012, some 314 Kosovars have joined the Islamic State, including 2 suicide bombers, 44 women, and 28 children. Even Belgium, widely seen as a hotbed of extremism after the attacks on Paris and Brussels, lag behind it in the recruitment rankings. By the way, somebody made a comment on YouTube last week that she has to break out the antacids when she starts listening to me. So this is probably a 3 antacid update. Okay. I'll tell you. At the start, I'll tell you if it's going to be a 5 antacid or a whole roll. Maybe you just want to make a soup of the whole roll and drink it right away. So, but the article says this: it remains unclear, at least to this article, it remains unclear why Kosovo's government, as well as the United Nations and United States and United Nations officials who administered post-war Kosovo, did not act sooner. The Americans may have erred in assuming that Kosovo's moderate religious community would prevent extremism from flourishing. Okay? They live in a different, it's like a parallel universe where up is down and right is wrong and left is right and everything's reversed. Here's an interesting little video. And I'm going to show you first how it originally appeared. And this is how you stop momentum. And it's kind of an interesting little thing, so watch this. Some clever person took the video and added just a couple little graphics, and I think it's a perfect example of what goes on in the world today. They added a Palestinian emblem to the rock. They put the Star of David on the big rock guy, and they put Europe on the little thing there. So now look at it with this context added. Europe. And it concludes with Israel's fighting your war. Okay, that's why it's important. That's one of the reasons why it's important. It is. This from the World Health Organization this week. A resolution was adopted supporting health conditions in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem and in the occupied Syrian Golan. And so they voted in favor of this. In fact, here's the report from the UN Watch organization, the UK, France, Germany, and other EU states. Now, do you see why I played the video that way? This is a perfect example. UK, France, Germany, and other EU states voted today for a UN resolution co-sponsored by the Arab group of states and the Palestinian delegation that singled out Israel at the annual assembly of the World Health Organization as the only violator in the world of mental, physical, and environmental health. I'm not making it up. It passed. The EU states voted in favor of it. The WHO commissioned a WHO delegation to investigate and report on the health conditions in the occupied Palestinian territory and in the occupied Syrian Golan, and to place it on the agenda again at next year's meeting. These people don't understand what's at issue. They don't. They're ignorant. They're willfully ignorant at this point. Here's a young man standing up for Israel named Ben Shapiro at a college meeting. Appreciate him tremendously. Here's what he had to say. I'm not sure. You have the video up? Well, for some reason, it's not playing. So I'll tell you what. He really blasted him. You think Israel's the problem? And I don't know if it's him or the next video clip that I'll play. They said WHO, they don't criticize Nigeria, Sudan, Palestinian, Syria, Iraq, Islamic State. No, we have to criticize Israel. And he essentially said, you people are crazy. Here's Colonel Richard Kemp, retired colonel from the British Army, speaking in a Gatestone Institute prepared clip.
The situation in the Middle East is turbulent, complicated, and can be very confusing. Nowhere is this truer than in Israel and the Palestinian territories. As well as complexity and confusion, there is also a great deal of disinformation, emanating either from the ill-informed, the misinformed, or from those who want to mislead. I served in the British Army for 30 years, often working in the type of security situation that we are talking about here. I've spent many years studying Middle East politics and security, and have been given unprecedented access to some of the most important decision makers in the region. There are two fundamental truths which will help you understand and make sense of what is really going on. The first fundamental truth is this: the leadership of the Palestinian people do not want their own state in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and Gaza. When you consider the vast efforts that have gone in over many years to try and find a way for the Palestinians to have their own state, efforts by the US, the UK, Israel, European countries, the EU and the UN, and many other nations and international organizations, none of these efforts have ever led to a Palestinian state and show no signs of doing so. The Palestinians want one thing only: the destruction of the Jewish state. That is also the goal of so many of their allies in the region. They don't want to see two peoples living side by side in peace together. Why do the Palestinians continuously refuse to make any concessions whatsoever for peace in the interests of their people? Why have they consistently rejected offers of a two-state solution, going all the way back to 1948? Why do the Palestinian leadership indoctrinate their people and educate their children to hate Jews and reject the Jewish state? TV shows, school textbooks, films, newspapers, magazines, websites, all official Palestinian materials and publications deny the Jewish state any right to exist and incite hatred. The indoctrination is so profound and so malignant that young boys and old women can just pick up a knife and go out and stab and slash a pregnant Jewish woman. The strength of their hatred is underlined by their knowledge that they themselves may well die in their violent acts. Why do the Palestinians attack Israel from Gaza with rockets and terror tunnels, inciting military exchanges that they know they cannot possibly win, that they know will result in dead Israelis, but death and misery for many more of their own people? I repeat, the Palestinians only want the destruction of the Jewish state. Of course, the Arabs now know that they can't destroy the Jewish state by military force. they have been trying to drive Jews out from the Holy Land for 100 years, since the 1920s. And during the Second World War, the Mufti of Jerusalem even persuaded Hitler to bring the Holocaust to the Middle East, to murder the Jews there as well as in Europe. And when the UN resolved that the State of Israel should be born in 1948, 5 Arab armies descended on the fledgling nation. Ever since then, they've been trying to destroy the Jewish state using conventional armies and every form of terrorism. Each time they failed and were themselves defeated. Their failure led to a completely different strategy. Demonizing, slandering, and distorting the truth about Israel in order to bring about her isolation and destroy her. This is a second fundamental truth. We are witnessing the greatest smear campaign in the history of the world. We see evidence of this every single day in the newspapers, on the radio, on the TV, all over the internet, at the UN, at the EU, and other international bodies, by many governments around the world, in our schools and universities, and by human rights groups. In 2015 alone, the UN General Assembly adopted 20 resolutions against Israel, and just 3 for the rest of the world combined. Not a single resolution was adopted on gross and systematic abuses committed by China, Cuba, Egypt, Pakistan, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Sri Lanka, Sudan, Yemen, Zimbabwe, or on dozens of other gross and systematic human rights violations. Just one resolution was adopted on Syria, a regime that has murdered more than 200,000 of its own people. 20 resolutions for Israel, 1 for Syria. The UN Human Rights Council consistently singles out Israel for false accusations of wanton brutality and war crimes. Allegations that have been dismissed by America's most senior military commander and by generals from around the world who have said that Israel goes to unprecedented lengths to avoid death or injury to civilians on the battlefield. In 2016, the UN Commission on the Status of Women concluded its annual meeting by condemning only one member for violating women's rights, Israel. There were no condemnations of any of the other 191 countries, in some of which women's rights are really violated systematically and daily. The anti-Israel falsehoods and abuse delivered from the UN resonate around the world and are then echoed and repeated in schools, universities, human rights groups, and the media. Many countries, human rights groups, and the global media unequivocally accuse Israel of illegal occupation and illegal settlement in the West Bank. Accusations that are not supported by international law and are rejected by some of the world's most distinguished legal authorities. These two fundamental truths represent the reality of the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. Look at every event, consider every argument through the prism of these two truths. This is Richard Kemp in London for Gatestone Institute.
By the way, if you're looking for an organization to support, I think Gatestone Institute is very worthy of your contribution. Look, this is a problem. I have a couple of things. I'm going to save those till next week. But there is this push for this two-state solution. This is what the world is pushing for. There's a lot of political turmoil right now in Prime Minister Netanyahu's coalition. A lot of people saying he's going to lose power. And look, I don't think he'll be prime minister forever. And eventually, the predictions that he will not be prime minister will be correct. But right now, I think too much is being made of it. But we'll see what happens. But here's an article from the Left is Right in the Jerusalem Post Thursday, I believe, talking about we need to get this two-state solution, and then all of our problems will be solved. And this is incredibly naive because there is an ideology out there that needs to be opposed. It's evil to its core. If you have access to Facebook, you go to my Facebook page, my timeline. I put a link to an audio interview that Frank Gaffney did on Friday with Phil Haney. I've mentioned Phil in the past. I know Phil. He's a wonderful, courageous man who has stood up, was an analyst at the Department of Homeland Security, and listen to the interview that Frank Gaffney did of him, and then go get Phil's book that was just released on Tuesday, See Something, Say Nothing. You can get it at Amazon. You can get it at WorldNet Daily, talking about his experience, about how he identified the terror ties to Islam, and how a lot of that information, the State Department in 2012 came in. Now, let's see, who was the Secretary of State in 2012? That would have been HRC, right? Came in and deleted it out of the system so law enforcement would not have access to the analysis that Phil had made. And I'm grateful that Phil's gone out and had the courage to speak about the despicable treatment that he got and the derelict performance of duties by people in charge of the State Department and the Department of Justice. It's indefensible, and people needs to be an issue in this election. So, I don't know, was that 3 antacids or more today? There really wasn't a lot going on, but I'm just telling you is that the whole nature of the world that we live in is radically changed in the last decade. It's different. And you know, God is still with us. In the end, we win, and we need to keep that in mind. And there's work to do in the meantime. One question, and then we'll go. The question is, will Clinton be dealt with her email deal in some way? And the answer is, you know, I wouldn't bet on it. I mean, Barack Obama's in charge. We got to go. So let's pray, and we'll take this up next week. Let's pray. Father, again, thank you so much for your word. Thank you for giving us the ability to be informed and understand the things that are going on around us, as troubling as they may be. Lord, I pray that you would steal our minds, steal our hearts, keep us faithful, guide us by your Spirit, that we can live for you faithfully in these days. Bless us as we go. In Jesus' name, amen.